So I plan my videos out pretty far in advance. I knew months ago that I'd make this video and post it now, and usually that's fine because language may be ever evolving, but not that fast, and there's still things to be learned from the old ways. On Writing by Stephen King and The Elements of Style by E.B. White still have a good advice even after all this time. The problem here is that I couldn't have predicted that this video would be topical. I, for many reasons, will continue to call it the Gulf of Mexico, and that's about as topical as I ever want to get on this channel. Let's talk about fiction and how you can come up with place names for your fictional places.
It was all fake.
For simplicity's sake, I'll mostly be referring to how to name cities and towns in this video, but the tips and tricks here are applicable to rivers, oceans, even the entire fantasy world you've made. The names of things tell us about the common languages, what the climate is like, who the important people are, what the local folklore is, and will overall help give your readers an idea for where your characters live. Do your characters live in a futuristic city with a futuristic name, or do they live in a magical town with a whimsical name? There's a lot that goes into naming things, and that's hard and can be daunting. So here are 8 ways to help find inspiration for different places in your story, starting with... This is going to be a point I bring up over and over again in this video, because it's pretty foundational to naming things. There's a lot of suffixes for towns and cities. Borough, ville, burg, ton. You can slap those onto the ends of a lot of words and suddenly have a city name. Or you don't necessarily need to use a suffix. You can use whole words like town or combine 2 other words like hang on. You could use forked minute. Alright, this won't work with every word, and you may have to put in some work in how you combine words, cut off the beginning of or end of some, but the point is there's a lot of potential when it comes to word smash. Take verbs and nouns or nouns and adjectives and combine them to make a unique name like Bright Spring. That's a fine name, and that's just 2 random words. But suffixes are a quick and dirty way to make it work too. Think Brightburg or Springville. And if you're also fighting with your dictionary, another place where you can draw inspiration is... Where is your fictional city and what geological features does it have? Geographical? I don't know, one of those long G words that I misspell. Figuring out what your city looks like can really help give you ideas for what settlers would have named their city. Is it snowy? Is it warm? Is it next to mountains or a river? You could name it Somerville or Winter Park, or name it after the features of those geological features. Frost or sun or eddies, deltas, rapids for river, slopes, peaks, valleys for mountain. Then you just go back to word smashing and add ville or burg or any of the other many suffixes you can use when describing a city, and you've got the city name. Or if you don't want to be quite so on point, you can name your city after the color of the river or mountain. I mean, that's what happened in my home state, Colorado. Color rojo. If you failed French in Spanish or Dora, rojo is red in Spanish. It was named because the rocks were red. Or if the wind comes down screaming down the mountains, name the city Screech or smash geometric features together. If your city was built on beautiful fields with a spring nearby, you could name it something crazy like Springfield or something. The point is, naming your city after the geological features around it can do a lot to give your reader an idea for what the city looks like, what the climate is like, and how living in the area affects your characters. A colder climate may make tougher, colder characters. A warmer climate may indicate warmer, more welcoming characters. And how your characters navigate those climates can show us a lot about them and help set up obstacles for your plot. Or if geography isn't your thing, you could also use... Did you know America was named after a person? There are some places where that's obvious, like Georgetown or Columbia, because, Columbus came to America and then everyone ate turkey. Did anyone else fail first grade history? Anyway, apparently Amerigo Vespucci was an explorer in the early 1500s who explored these strange new continents and then published a map where he named them after himself. And there's no reason why someone in your story couldn't have done the same. I should have made a video on naming characters before this one, because that is a video on its own that I will make. For now, just Google baby names, and when you find one you like, add a suffix or change the beginning or ending of the name like Amerigo did. Or you don't even need to do that. There are plenty of towns named Franklin, and we have a state and a DC named Washington. And you can do all three. Change the ending, add the suffix, or don't, and suddenly you have multiple place names and some lore on who this person is that was so important they got named for multiple places.
Who is this clown?
You do want to be careful though, because adding a person's name to a town's name could establish lore you may not be ready to dive into. And if you're mostly using English names, but you find the perfect Japanese name for your town, it will come across as strange and out of place. Who was this Haruhi person? Where'd they come from? Why were they so important that they got towns and cities named after them, but there's not a deeper cultural osmosis they're affecting the culture? And this is also an easy pitfall to fall into, because a language you're not as familiar with will have names that sound more like place names than people names to us, but they might be the most common name in their area. It'd be jarring if we suddenly came across a Chinese story where there's a random town named Susan. Be careful not to do the same, especially if you want your story to reach a wider audience. Or if you're struggling with naming your characters and can't look at any more people names, you could use... This is where I riff on the British a bit, because America is too young to have old town names, and the British have names like Bristol or Edinburgh, and I don't know where those names originated, but they're old and whimsical, and you'll probably be able to find a lot of inspiration by looking at retired dictionary words. Honestly, there's something to be said from just straight up stealing old British town names, because Edinburgh, that's just a fun word to say. But there's also meteorologician. This is an old 14th century word, and the only place I could find any mention of it was Merriam-Webster's dictionary. It's a weird and forgotten word, and I loved it and used it, not for a town, but for an ethnic group in my book. So go digging for those old words. And you don't necessarily need to use old words. You can use old people names too. In my story, I also stole Mesopotamian god names because they were ancient and imposing. But I also kind of screwed up because Zababa and Gula are not at all associated with the things I use their names for. You have to be careful not to get too attached to the names you come up with before you do your research. And you should do some research on whatever ancient names or retired words you find. Words change with time, and you don't want to accidentally use a word with a meaning that was once so intertwined with culture it takes away from the city and plot when people learn more about it. Or an old swear word, even though Strumpetburg would be a fun town name. Or if these old dusty words aren't for you, you could try. I just mentioned stealing old British town names, but there's nothing stopping you from stealing town names from anywhere. There are a lot of Springfields and Franklins in the US, so if you need a town name for a place you don't want to give much thought to, a dart on the map could be the solution. If your readers are already familiar with a town in real life or in fiction that shares the name of that random town your characters had to spend a single night in, then they're less likely to ask questions about where the name came from. Then you don't have to establish much lore. Just again, be aware of where your town is and if that name makes sense for the area. You're not going to name an area surrounded by rivers and lush valleys oasis. If you do, you'll need to establish lore for why it got such a seemingly out-of-place name. And that defeats why you wanted to just steal a pre-existing name in the first place. You'll also want to do some quick research on the towns you're stealing the names from if they're more uncommon. Not that far from where I grew up, there's a Mount Blue Sky that was previously Mount Evans, and it got changed because Evans was a slaveholder. Now, obviously, Evans isn't an uncommon last name, but if you have a strong anti-racist or anti-slavery theme in your book, you might want to pick up the dart and try again. Or if you're like me and you don't own dart, you could also use... I love scientific names. I use scientific names in my story all the time. It helps reinforce the themes I'm going for while giving me more freedom. Like in my story, I needed to name several characters after bees, so I used scientific names for bees and got plenty of names that may be strange, but they work, and the ones I used for the girls are pretty. Like Andrina, that's a scientific name for a particular bee species, but it doesn't sound like an uncommon name. Granted, that's a people name. Alright, genus is a better example for what we're doing here. Genus is stolen from the scientific name for roses for a religion with strong floral ties. It sounds like it could be a strange pagan religion while reinforcing the floral themes I was going for. But you don't need to use scientific names like I do. I also have a character whose name is just Toad. I've got to stop bringing up characters in this video. But Roseburg or Mesa Verde are all good names with strong links to nature. There are thousands of plants and animals you can draw inspiration from. Just, again, be aware of where your city is. It does not make sense to name a random town in Midwestern America Tigerville without establishing why. You have a town named after tigers in Asia or South America, I wouldn't bat an eye, because tigers are native to those areas and they play a strong role in a lot of folklore because of that. You have a town in Colorado named Columbine. Again, wouldn't bat an eye because they are everywhere, both the flower and places named for the flower. Or if you're not referring to nature in your book as much, you could also use... I've already brought up England and used up most of the Spanish I know between Rojo and Verde, so I might as well point out that other languages are a great place to draw inspiration from for your place names. Again, colors, natures, or the suffixes that are common in their language can help give you inspiration and make your city seem more foreign by incorporating the different languages. But as I said with Haruhi, you need to be careful. Why was a new language used? Is there a reason for it? Have you established a diversity in names and culture within your book that a town named Haruhi or Verde doesn't seem that out of place? Or are you using a common enough word like Rojo that no one really bats an eye when you use it in a book that's written in English? At least I assume it's in English. You're watching this video after all. You also want to be careful figuring out the meaning of the word. What are its tenses? When is it used? Is it formal or informal? There's a lot of thought that goes into picking words from different languages to use for place names, but they can have a big payoff, making your world seem as whimsical as Edinburgh. The word, I'm not commenting on the city, while reinforcing the themes of your book and what the city is like. And you also don't want to discount dead languages. This can also be used for scientific name things because those are based in Latin. Latin, ancient Greek, ancient Egyptian, those are languages that sound ancient and whimsical and will never change. Or if you struggle with English, you could also use... I've been repeating myself a lot in this video, and there's a reason for that. There are rules to naming things that make them flow off the tongue and be memorable. Follow those rules, be repetitive. A lot of places share names. Use nature and geography to give your reader an idea for what the city is like. And use suffixes, and also keep it short. Edinburgh isn't a long name, but I misspelled it every time in my script. If you're going for a strange name and you don't want your readers to glaze over it, keep it simple and short. A name that's easier to read will be easier to remember, and that will help your reader know where the characters are and not get lost and break immersion while still doing all the work you want it to help give them the feel for the city and themes of the world. And you don't want to overthink it. Place names are great for reinforcing themes, but they're not a requirement. In my story, I didn't name a lot of stuff, like the continents or the actual world, because they weren't important. I had plenty of names for cities, religions, ethnic groups that did require that attention, and I feel like rationing my energy made the names stronger and a lot less daunting. And I also just gave a lot of places really uninspired names. All my continents are just the mother continent to insert ethnic group here. Not inspired, but also didn't require a ton of energy for something that didn't affect my book and was easy enough for my readers to follow. I'm lost! That's some tips on how to find names for the places in your book. You can draw inspiration from a lot of places and mince words to fit your world and make your city, river, continent, or plenty of other things fit into the world. And a good place to find inspiration is in books. So don't forget to go out and read and write.
Time's a charm.